Today, I certainly want to thank the tribe of Dan, which is basically two people, I think, Tony Ledbetter and Rhoda Grubb, for enhancing our worship. They have done, I think, an excellent job of combining God and country. The things that we remember here today on Memorial Day. We remember those, as the scripture says, who are now clothed in robes in white, and he will shelter them. Have you ever had the experience of going from one room to another of your house, and by the time you get halfway to the other room or the other room, you wonder, where am I going, or what am I doing, or why am I doing that? I sure hope you have. I hope I'm not the only one. How about this one? You're off driving somewhere in town with a specific purpose. I used to do this frequently. I'd be going to the post office. And about halfway there, I'd wonder, where am I going? Why am I going? Why am I doing this? The refrigerator, yeah. Okay, good. At least I know someone else has a similar experience. Memory is a tricky thing. And it is so, particularly as we get older. And I think as we get older, we get a little more sensitive to it, and we're more fearful of some bad dementia or something. But memory is just tricky. But there are some things that we really should never, ever forget. And one of these is the sacrifices that have been made in our behalf. The sacrifices for you and me. The sacrifices of people, our loved ones who have gone on before us. And certainly of those who have served the country and protected us. I took some thoughts today for this sermon from a sermon that was preached by King Duncan. And I think they're very appropriate. King happens to be, I think, a Baptist preacher. But I read his sermon on this subject, and I thought it was pretty good. And he tells about a spring morning in 1866, following the devastation of the South as a result of that great war between the states that we call the Civil War. A group of Southerners did something at the ending of that war that was quite extraordinary. They marched down the street of a small town, of what was left of that town anyway, to go to a cemetery. And when they got to that cemetery, they decorated the graves. What was unique about this is they didn't just decorate the graves of the Southern soldiers. They decorated the graves of all soldiers. Their mothers and their daughters and their widows had buried those dead. Now these soldiers returning buried their hatred. The time for healing had come, and that became the first Memorial Day. And Reverend King suggests that Memorial Day is celebrated in May for a very practical reason. There is no religious reason. There's no secular reason. It just happens at a time when most of the flowers are in bloom, and you need flowers to put on the grave. And so that's why we celebrate Memorial Day near the end of May. It doesn't have any significance in time or anything else, even though it is a very significant event. I remember the day, and maybe you do too, when Memorial Day wasn't called Memorial Day. It was called Decoration Day. And people went to the cemetery for the sole purpose of decorating the cemetery. And when I was a boy growing up in Topeka, Kansas, we had a big celebration at a city park on that day. And that celebration was sponsored by our Senator, Arthur Capper. And it was full of food and fun and games, and patriotism. And I didn't know Memorial Day had any other meaning other than that celebration. It was Senator Capper's celebration. His birthday happened to fall around then too, and they used to accuse him of celebrating it for his birthday, but it was really for Memorial Day. And today around the country, there will be volunteers who go to various cemeteries and they place flags on the graves, and they don't really even know why. They just do it. One young man who was a 13-year-old boy was asked one time, why did he go on Memorial Day to place the flags on the graves? And he went with his Boy Scout troop. And he didn't have any trouble answering. He says, to get service hours, community hours. It was that simple for him. He didn't understand the meaning of it. So we need to remember the meaning on this Memorial Day, that we honor those who have gone before us, those who the Scriptures have said are clothed in those white robes, and they're sheltered by one because of their service. We need to remember our debt to others for where we are here today. You know, you and I are not here today by what we have done through our own efforts alone. Nobody gets through life totally on their own efforts. They always have to have help from someone else, and I contend help from above. There is no greater myth than the self-made person. We owe an enormous debt from the moment we are born, and some of that debt is certainly owed to those young people throughout the various wars who have shed their blood on battlefields around the world. Many of them gave their lives because they truly believed that freedom is worth dying for. To honor their sacrifice is not to glorify war. I don't mean to convey that that's the purpose, because I believe war is the ultimate blasphemy to God. God loves all of his children. He doesn't want any of us killing any of his children for any reason at all. But we still live in a cruel world where some people seem to think that war is the answer to some of our solutions. And my friends, it is not. Dwight David Eisenhower, a wonderful general and a great president, once said, war has never solved any of man's problems. He said, you only go to war because you don't know how to achieve peace. So we still live in that cruel world where people think war is really okay. It might be necessary. Wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a world where people always played by the rules? They always thought nice things about one another. Where no one coveted his neighbor's property. Where never again would we have to rely on military might in order to enforce justice. But such a world does not exist yet. And we do not know, as we sit here this morning, the dangers that await us and await society. When the war between the states flared up, a young Texas boy enlisted and he marched off to fight with his friends. We won't be gone long, he claimed, because we can lick them with broomsticks. Any Southern boy can beat a Yankee with broomsticks. 4 years later, when the Southern boy comes home, he's a beaten man. And one of his neighbors asked him, "What happened? I thought you were going to beat them Yankees with broomsticks." And he says, "Well, we could have, but we couldn't get them to fight with broomsticks." It would be nice if we could totally eliminate our defense establishment with the knowledge that no nation would ever commit aggression against his neighbor again. But that just isn't the world we live in today. And Winston Churchill used to tell a parable about a zoo in which all of the animals agreed to disarm. So the animals arranged peace talks to work out the details of this peace agreement. And the rhinoceros asked for a strict ban against the use of teeth in a war. And the stag and the porcupine agreed. But the lion and the tiger defended the use of teeth as being honorable weapons. The bear, however, wanted both teeth and horns to be banned, but he thought a general hug was a real good idea. Well, none of them could agree because that only served to offend all the other animals, and they didn't come to an agreement about peace. You see, that's the kind of world we live in. We can't agree on the things that it takes to create peace. Through the century, young people have been sacrificed in the cause of our inability to come to agreement on what is peace. Some of these wars that we've had in our past have been totally senseless, and some even barbaric. But others have been necessary. And we honor the memory today of those who have not only given their lives to protect us in this country, but we honor those who have given their lives in the service of God. And there have been many over the generations. There have been tens of thousands of such sacrifices through the ages. There are countless numbers of religious martyrs who have died for their faith. Died so that you and I could be sitting here today in worship of God the way we choose to worship, so that we can have peace and joy and love. You see, their sacrifices can remind us today how anemic our actions to show our love for God really are. They gave their all that they had, and we give so very little. Well, there's another thing that we need to remember, and that is the Lamb who died for us. J. Wilbur Chapman used to tell a story of a soldier who was mortally wounded, and his buddy Jim stayed by him through his long and lonely illness to the very end. "Jim, I'm going to die," Charlie whispered to his friend. And knowing Jim had no family of his own, Charlie added, "But I want you to go back to my mother, and you take my place as her son." "But Charlie, your mother doesn't even know me," Jim reminded him as he was dying. "She wouldn't even allow me to come into her house and live as her son." And Charlie explained, "I will write a letter to her, and you will take it to her." The letter told the mother of her son's ill fortunes, of his wounds, of his suffering, and how Jim had stuck by him day and night through thick and through thin until he died. The letter closed like this: "Mother, receive Jim for my sake." Well, after the close of the war, Jim went to Charlie's hometown. He sought out Charlie's mother's home. He knocked on the door, and he stood there waiting, ragged and worn from the ravages of war, a very unsightly character. A lady came and she opened the door. She looked down upon him, and she thought him to be just another beggar who was passing by. But Jim handed her the letter through her half-open door. And she read it. She recognized her own son's handwriting. And when she had read that last line, "Mother, please receive Jim for my sake," the expression on her face changed. Tears of emotion welled up inside, and the door threw open wide, receiving Jim for Charlie's sake. According to our Bibles, that sort of acceptance is the story of the cross. God accepts us as His very own, and He does it for Christ's sake. We may not understand why it had to be this way, but we look at the cross, and there we see an open door, a door to God. And thus we remember those who died that we may live in freedom. We remember those who died that we may live in faith. We remember Christ who died that we may live forever. That's the ultimate meaning of this Memorial Day weekend. Remembering those who died that we may live in freedom, remembering those who died that we may live in faith, and remembering Christ who died that we may live forever. It's a time to remember, and it's a time to finish what they all started. It's a time to remember, both with sadness and with gratitude, the sacrifices that others over the centuries have made for us, for you, and for me. Now it's time. It's time for us to go and tell our story. Amen.